Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new edition of the Broken Not Broke interview, where we talk to leaders of foundations focused on childhood cancer, and we discuss the financial impact that this diagnosis and the treatment have on families. My name is Adrian Franco. I am the executive director of the Guarini Institute and the architect of the Broken Not Broke initiative that specifically works on facilitating information on how to access financial support for families with children with cancer. Today, we're honored to have as our guest Maggie Spada, who is the co-founder of Little Warrior Foundation. She describes herself as a fierce momcologist. I have seen that in many opportunities that the foundation had with videos and other uh, outlets, and it was great for us to connect. I must say that my son was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma. That is the cancer that Little Warrior Foundation uh, focuses on. And I think it's very unique that a rare cancer like this has a foundation dedicated to it, but also that they do so much great work that we can discuss over the interview. Just to give you some numbers, they have given more than $4.5 million to clinical trials and research for Ewing sarcoma, besides other projects. Maggie, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
The first question we have for our guest is why childhood cancer, and in this case, Ewing sarcoma, has such an impact in household finances?
Well, I think that any time a terminal or critical illness is dropped into your lap, there are massive financial implications. And when that life-threatening disease is a child, it takes on sort of a ripple effect. You're already spinning plates as a parent, sometimes a parent to multiple children, juggling a career, and suddenly every priority you've had, every best laid plan you have is flipped on its head for this diagnosis that always strikes out of nowhere. I've heard people say everyone's story is the same. The details are just a little bit different. And that's very true when I think it comes to a diagnosis, really any childhood cancer diagnosis. They are, intrinsically rare compared to the frequency of adult cancers. And so there's sort of a chaos that surrounds that moment of diagnosis and then a reorganization of every priority you've had in your adult life up until that point. I think that Ewing sarcoma, I know what I know, and that was unfortunately what my daughter was diagnosed with. It's a very long treatment regimen. It is, really a solid year of chemotherapy. And I really only know of 2 hospitals in the entire country that give the option for that chemotherapy to be delivered outpatient, which means that families spend, the better part of a year living in a hospital, and you need to be there with your kid. So the implications there are you can't be home juggling the others. You can't be home managing home life. You can't be home cooking dinners, meal planning, all these things that you thought were important and you prioritized. You can't be at work. You need to be with your child, living out of a hospital room without a refrigerator. So it becomes very difficult, I think, to manage any semblance of normalcy when you have a Ewing sarcoma diagnosis in the family.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Those long treatments that I have heard not only at even sarcoma, leukemia, in some cases, like could take years.
Yeah.
Um, Based on your observations, tell us about the implications in the long term for a family, not only within those years of treatment, but even in years ahead, in terms of not only the patient but the whole family.
Well, the one of the things that we've often reflected on is just the fact that, the chemo ends and the hair grows back and hopefully your child stays healthy, but nothing, it never really stops. You're always still dealing with a critical medical issue, sometimes to varying degrees, but the medicine itself, right? The treatments, the surgeries, the ongoing care, the physical therapy, the lymphedema, the fertility preservation, the managing the thyroid and the toxic effects of the medicine that save their lives, that all has an intrinsic cost. And outside of that, when you sort of imagine, if you're lucky and your child goes through frontline therapy and is quote unquote done, the cancer is eradicated, and you only have to deal with those side effects. There's also sort of it's almost, with some reflection, I'm now almost 5 years out from Lucy finishing treatment. There is a sort of a stutter step, in life of, okay, well, we weren't able to, I don't know, maybe max out a 401k. We weren't able to take advantage of college savings accounts because in the moment, none of that stuff is important. It isn't. And your resources go to the most critical things, which is continuing to be able to put food on the table, keep your other children's lives as normal as possible, and make sure that your child, God willing, comes out unscathed. And so I look at even just taking this to my story is my husband was starting a business at the time. And it just stopped. It wasn't worth the time, effort, and energy that went into kind of the dedication you need to give to something when this now became our 100% focus. So, incomes change. We know it's been studied, not just anecdotally, but it has been studied through the American Society of Clinical Oncology that incomes go down, costs go up. We know that. So you have sort of this increased out-of-pocket spending, you have reduced income coming in, and you have massive elevated psychological stress. I mean, you have trauma. You have people seeped in trauma trying to make decisions. And so these sort of short-term goals of prioritizing, financial plans and buckets of money, all of that is really set aside. I think we are very fortunate, as I mentioned, because Lucy's doing well, but I look and know so many families whose cancer journey doesn't last a year. It lasts 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. And the impact on those families long term, it's severe. I mean, you cannot hold down your typical jobs and be there for all that your child needs. And then there's the sort of snowball effect of, well, if I don't have the job, what's the insurance? And if our insurance changes because I need to take a different job to accommodate being there for my child, what treatments are not covered? And suddenly the medicine itself becomes an issue. So it is, a stone dropped into a pond of still water, and it just sort of continues the longer that you are in the space. And, for Ewing sarcoma, particularly a metastatic diagnosis, most children will have a relapse. It's going to be years of dealing with the diagnosis itself. Does that, I just talked for a long time, but does that answer your answer the
No,
question?
no. Well, so first of all, yes, and I think it's very important for people who listen to this interview to understand those effects that, as a family, you need to focus on the now and the immediate expenses, but there is such a disruption that, many aspects of your financial life will change and will change in the long term. I saw in your bio that you are a financial planner, financial advisor, professional, and I think that that brings a very interesting perspective for many families. That the long-term consequences you mentioned, the 401k, the college funds, even retirement funds. I assume this is something that is difficult to save for. So from that perspective, Maggie, have you seen any initiatives or do you have any ideas about how do you address the need to keep planning for the future when you have such an immediate disruption?
So, I had my two hats I can wear is me answering you like a mom who's been through this, and as a professional. I'll tell you, as a professional, I am a wealth manager. I focus and talk every day about the importance of prioritizing money into different buckets, but I've never had to advise someone like myself going through a cancer diagnosis. And so I know that there's no sort of magic parachute to pull when something like this happens. It simply becomes a game of prioritizing what's most important right now. And so I think that, there's things we can strive for, like, okay, if we're putting money into a 401k, can we reduce down to at least what they match? And so then we're like getting at least the free money that the employer provides. Or do we need to just pause because we literally need that income to cover the copay on your child's treatment? I mean, that is going to be prioritized. And none of this other stuff, these retirement plans, the college funds, the things that people are privileged to be able to save money for, none of those are important in the wake of your child's life. You stop everything that you previously prioritized in order to make sure that your child is healthy, they're getting the best treatment possible, and that your other children are cared for, because it is so expensive to go through something like this. In our own family, we were very fortunate in that I had an employer that provided incredibly flexible leave. And so that I think I often reflect on that. Like, I do not know what we would have done if I was perhaps in a career that required me to be at work every day. If you're a nurse, you do not have an option to work virtually. You need to be there. And so this sort of combination of a really generous employer leave plan, my husband being able to just kind of stop what he was doing, and us really buckling down because we were going through treatment in the midst of COVID and there was like nothing to go do anyways, was honestly our saving grace. I think that in general, the support of a employer is really important. The support of your community. So I see so often, just in a member of the other parent groups that I'm associated with, the GoFundMes that occur just from your immediate kind of crowdfunding people that love you. And then honestly, organizations like yours and organizations that help provide resources, nonprofits that can step in and fund the gap. Those are at the current moment the best things you can have in your back pocket is, good support at work, good support from your community, good support from, I think, the common community that's there to help lighten the burden. There again is not a magic, my child's been diagnosed with cancer, parachute string that you can pull that suddenly comes in to lessen the burden.
We know that Little Water Foundation has been incredibly successful in funding research and clinical trials. Can you make any connection between, that support you give and the long-term implications for the financial impact of families?
Yes, that's a really great question. Financial toxicity was not really a term that I had heard outside of this childhood cancer space, but it becomes very clear why it's termed that way. When your child's going through cancer, you hear a lot about the clinical toxicity of everything that they are going through. And from where we stand, Little Warrior is 100% focused on research. Every dime that we give out is going to move the needle for better outcomes. Because if we can make the treatment itself shorter and less toxic to the child, you also are making the financial impact shorter and less toxic to the family. So if you can simply be handed a diagnosis that instead of being life-threatening is a chronic disease with an answer, it becomes something that is much more easy to navigate than the current state, which is unfortunately, a 40-year plus old protocol with very little research or options for a relapse, which then again snowballs into years of treatment, years out of work. If this could become something that we can treat with immunotherapy, and a few days here and there at the hospital, and your child is on their way to good health, it curbs sort of all of these intangibles that are very disruptive and destructive to a family's life.
I think that's a very important point to highlight, Maya, and I appreciate you say it because many people think of this about two different aspects, right? Like we need to focus on research, we need to focus on treatment, better outcomes, and others think of, well, let's just give money to the families because they need it right now. And although both have its own merits, I believe that as a community, we need to start thinking of both together. And I think you just make a very clear case for that. I thank you for that. We know from your website in Little Water Foundation about the Hope Portal. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so right kind of along with what you're saying, that sort of marriage between these two things is at Little Warrior Foundation, the team has done such a great job honing in on the science and understanding sort of what treatments might be up and coming, what things we're interested in funding and putting our resources behind to make them move to the clinic faster. And because of that, we get a lot of inquiries from families, on a weekly basis, reaching out, usually with scientific questions. But as the foundation base grew, we also realized there were so many families reaching out saying, hey, do you guys provide meal gift cards? Do you provide financial support? Do you help with travel at all? And you can't ignore that. That is it's a very real need. In fact, we recently had Dr. Emily Slotkin, who is one of the biggest physicians treating Ewing sarcoma at Memorial Sloan Kettering. She came to an event we had, and one of her comments was just, it is known and it is studied, and I can't provide the source, but I trust her. She said, it is studied that children with highly involved caregivers have better outcomes. But how can you be highly involved if you are figuring out how I'm going to afford a DoorDash of a Caesar salad to the hospital because it's the only thing my 6-year-old wants to eat right now? Do you know what I mean? It is the layers of stress that are there. And so my point with this is that if we can alleviate sort of like the treatment itself and alleviate that stress and provide sort of resources for families to, I think, just eliminate that financial burden. It allows them to be more involved. It allows the child to potentially have a better outcome, and you pair that with better science. So with the Hope Portal, all credit for the Hope Portal goes to the organization that created it, which is CAC2, the Childhood, I'm going to blank on the name now because I'm on the spot. Childhood Advocacy Coalition. No, Coalition Against Childhood Cancer. CAC2.org is their website. And their entire purpose is to unify and amplify efforts of childhood cancer foundations. So we were chatting a little bit. There's no competition in childhood cancer space. Like, we are all so starved for resources that everybody works together, but it can be very difficult as a parent who is in need of resources to, let me send an email to the Little Warrior Foundation, and then I'll send an email to Alex's Lemonade Stand, and then I'll send one to Rally Foundation. And so the Hope Portal is a kind of an amalgamation of all of these that functions much in the same way that Broken Not Broke does, which I think is really incredible, because we need more resources that are kept up to date, that are available. And so we simply felt that these people needed somewhere to turn, and that when they reached out needing those resources, we could push them in the direction of a sort of an established source at this point. And I think that there's so much room for collaboration, and hopefully as as AI grows, that we can make these resources and these tools even smarter to help people get the help that they need quickly, because you're under so much stress, so much duress, there's so much to manage. And then this idea of how do I afford, Ubers to the hospital and back is just a stress that shouldn't need to be there.
Um, Following up on that issue of the importance of collaboration and find a way to connect the dots, love to hear your thoughts about any either systemic or even policy changes that will improve the outcomes for the family, for the patient, for the caregivers, um, for the research.
Yeah, I think that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention just better policies for leave at work where it's possible. That, these diseases are not, 3 to 6 weeks long. You need to be able to have a flexible leave policy and for employers to help support that. I also think that coverage for the medicine itself, we're talking a lot about some more of the intangible expenses that come following the diagnosis, but treatment for childhood cancer needs to be covered, full stop. And while there are Medicaid programs through Katie Beckett or TEFRA waivers that do allow for coverage in your state to be covered, right now, there really is not coverage from Medicaid for your child to travel for treatment, which is totally outrageous. There are people with very common and very treatable adult cancers that still elect to travel and can have that covered from their insurance because they want a certain surgeon, a certain radiation oncologist. And for cancers that are this rare, and to expect the top physicians to be in a tiny city in whatever rural place you happen to be living, it's outrageous. These hospitals might see 1 or 2 cases a year, period. And so the ability to say, under Medicaid, I'm going to pick up my child and we are flying to this hospital where they treat the most because that child deserves the best treatment. That Medicaid coverage component is a whole ball of wax that I am not going to solve, but that I think really needs a second look from our government. I think that that is essential. I also think that, as you were mentioning, Adrienne, that comment about social workers is really important, because when I think back to that moment of diagnosis and the needs, suddenly they all kind of bubble up at once. You're suddenly like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do all of this? That person became really important in directing us. But every hospital has sort of a finite resource. And so, just thinking out loud is that sort of the avenue, is rather than it maybe falling more on the patient, is it a situation where we seek to educate the social workers of sort of a centralized portal of resources that they can access easily and that is up to date? Because as we were talking about earlier, a lot of these things tend to fall off and becomes maybe a pursuit that isn't all that effective. So those are 3 thoughts that I have that I think would be extremely useful.
Thank you. Here at Broken Not Broke, we couldn't agree more with what you just said. Let me just point out what you mentioned of social workers. You appreciate so much, this profession when you go through a chronic illness or I would say any major disruption in life, but in particular this one. Any final thoughts about what we have discussed, Maggie?
No, I just really want to thank you for what you do. I think that your focus and I think that this is so important, and it is often just like an asterisk at the end of the giant binder of all the things your child's going to go to and go through. Rather, we talk about the side effects of the medications and the need for research funding, and those things are important. But sort of this other element of financial toxicity is very real and has long-term effects, and we need to find better ways to support families in the moment and prevent it from becoming a snowball that's very difficult to recover from. And so I just want to thank you for rolling up your sleeves and taking it on.
Thank you to you for joining us today, but thank you in particular to you and the whole team of Little Warrior Foundation for the outstanding job that you are doing. I believe that focusing on one particular rare cancer like this is very important. I must highlight the university aspect of it, the YouTube videos that you have on Ewing University. I think it has been incredibly educational for me. But I will say everyone who is interested in childhood cancer should look at them, besides all the other work that you do, in particular funding research that we all are eager and hopeful about it. So thank you to everyone at Little Warrior Foundation. Um, Please visit their website. If you can donate, please do. This is money that will go to a very important cause. And managed by people who really understand the implications of childhood cancer. Thank you, everyone. This will be in our YouTube channel. And again, thanks to the team at the Guarini Institute for their support. Thank you. Bye, everyone.